to the cloud. Okay, Haribol. So we don't have a ton of questions today. We have 3, but before we take the questions, is there anything you'd like to share?
Well, it's nice here at Gaudiya, and we're making good progress with the publishing, especially of my book, the editing of that. All 3 of us here, Vern Runyon, Kurdish and I, are working on it in different ways, and Haridas also, Radhana's husband, partner, whatever.
Yeah.
And so that's good. And what else? Chidahari's been here. He's living at Brahma's Inn, which is just down the road from us. And he's been working 5 days a week here. There's just so much to do. So that's been very, very helpful. Abai is here. He's going to be here for a couple of more months and over the summer, and that's our team at the moment. So everything's good. Why don't we go ahead and take the questions?
Sure. So Padmanabha Swami.
Yes. Okay. Do I need to repeat that in English or no? It'd be hard to repeat it, but the question is about something that Jagadananda, a godbrother of mine, has written, I guess, recently somewhere. And therein he says something to the effect that ISKCON and Gaudiya Math are do not carry. Okay. Institutions like Gaudiya Math and ISKCON and its branches are not possessed of the cultural authenticity of the original Gaudiya Vaishnavism. And he goes on to say that these sects represent certain historical moments of Vaishnavism, its surroundings in different times and circumstances. And they have their ethos, their prejudices, their cultural standards, and institutionalized forms and names, all of which are an extra shell on the cover of pure bhakti. So the question is, could I comment on that? First of all, Jagadananda, for those of you who is a godbrother of mine. He was initiated by Prabhupada and was given the name Hiranyagarbha Das. And after Prabhupada's departure, he took sannyas from another godbrother of mine who was an ISKCON guru at the time named Bhavananda. Bhavananda, unfortunately, was able to live up to the standards of spiritual leadership expected of him, so that was a disappointment. Jagadananda was serving in the Gurukula in Mayapur at the time. He had spent a lot of time, was Canadian by birth. And one thing led to another. After the departure of Prabhupada, he ended up coming in touch with Lalit Prasad, who was the godbrother of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and he took initiation from Lalit Prasad. And he was at the time convinced by certain arguments that were questioned the Siddhanta. He was moved by those arguments. After some years, he, however, was not able to keep up the standard of renunciation. He had become a Babaji, and he flirted seriously with the Sahajiya doctrines, the Prakriti Sahajiya sects of Braj. And at a certain point, he felt that he had departed from the standard of commitment and whatnot expected of him by Lalit Prasad and so forth. And he left Mayapur and he went to ended up getting a doctorate in Sanskrit from Oxford University, and he was living in Canada with his wife and son. And after I wrote published my edition of Bhavanuvad on the Tattva Sandarbha, one of my godbrothers who was living with me at the time sent it out, the manuscript, to different scholars. He didn't tell me about that, but he had a list of scholars, of Indologists and so forth. And Jan Brzezinski was one of them, which is the secular name of Hiranyagarbha or Jagadananda. And so he received the book and he was very inspired by it, and he got in touch with me. So I invited him to come and spend time with me, which he did. Come and spend a week or 10 days with me. We talked and walked about all types of things. And I encouraged him to get more, involved in Gaudiya Vaishnavism. And he seemed inspired, and he asked me, what name should I use, Hiranyagarbha or Jagadananda? So I told him to use the name, I suggested, I should say, he use the name Jagadananda for different reasons. And so he got back into the community, so to speak, actively, and he's quite a thinker and a writer as well. And one thing led to another, and eventually he found himself where he's now, working with the Jiva Institute, founded by Satyanarayan Das Babaji, along with Navadvip Das, a good friend of mine. As a team, the three of them, Satyanarayan Das Babaji, Jagadananda, and Navadvip Das, their focus being primarily right now the Sandarbhas, publishing the Sandarbhas. So, a little history. Regarding the comments of Jagadananda, they seem fairly accurate. I take exception to some of the words that are used here, the implications of them, which I guess makes it less than accurate in my mind. He says, for example, that ISKCON and Gaudiya Math are not possessed of the cultural authenticity of original Gaudiya Vaishnavism. I would take exception to the word authenticity. I think that he goes on to say that they are represent certain historical moments in response to surroundings um, and circumstances that previously didn't exist. So, of course, obviously, those circumstances are bringing Gaudiya Vaishnavism in touch with the modern world, which Bhaktivinoda Thakur did, and then around the world, which Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur started by sending some missionaries, if you will, to England and Germany, and then my Guru Maharaj, Om Vishnu Padesi Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, took further, as you know, around the world: North America, South America, Central America, Europe, and so forth. Eventually, by extension, through his disciples, Far East as well. So those are unique circumstances, and it begins with Bhakti Vinod interfacing with modernity and what the rest of the world was thinking, which was at his doorstep in Calcutta, the headquarters at that time in India of the British Empire. So, yes, ISKCON and Gaudiya Math and Bhakti Vinod in particular do represent an adapting Gaudiya Vaishnavism, adapting to new circumstances. I would say that that adaptation stands out a bit more than earlier adaptations of, for example, in Manipur, where Narayana Thakur went and had success in bringing converting persons to, introducing persons to Gaudiya Vaishnavism. Whenever the Manipuri, can you hear me?
It seems like it's breaking up a little bit.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. It's just kind of like periodically breaking up. Like I can like kind of make out what you're saying. It's just breaking up some.
Well, I'll do the best what I can.
Sure, yeah.
But as I was saying, whenever would be in Vrindavan, and the Manipuri Vaishnavas would come for Manipuri Gaudiya Vaishnavas would come for pilgrimage, they had a distinct cultural feel to them that was representative of Gaudiya Vaishnavism being adapted into Manipuri culture. Obviously, the difference between Manipuri culture and Bengali culture is not as dramatic as the difference between Western cultural sensibilities and Indian cultural sensibilities. So I think that what Jagadananda is talking about is the fact that Gaudiya Vaishnavism had a particular cultural ethos and so forth, but as it expanded out beyond Bengal and Vrindavan, even to Puri, to some extent, it would have it adapted a little bit, but beyond those sacred dhams of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, you're going to find that it acclimates and adapts to the culture that it's in to some extent. But more dramatically, it will show up, as I'm saying, when the adaptation involves a whole entirely different cultural ethos and sensibilities. But that's what Bhaktivinoda Thakur was one of the main things that he was interested in, and he asked Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur to do that. I just when you say it's not possessed of the cultural authenticity, it it does not lack the spiritual essence of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. Now, some branches of ISKCON or Gaudiya Math may lack the essence. That's another thing. But some branches of Bengali Vaishnavism in Bengal may also lack it, and they may also adapt culturally to some extent to modern times in India today, to include things that weren't included previously. So yes, at any rate, Gaudiya Vaishnavism, as represented by ISKCON and Gaudiya Math, following the lead of Bhakti Thakur, to interface Gaudiya Vaishnavism. But that's not does not necessarily imply that they depart essentially in terms of the spiritual essence of the teaching. So that said, he goes on to say here that which would include ours, have their ethos, their prejudices, naturally. I don't think he's using these terms, prejudice, ethos, cultural standards, institutional forms and names in a pejorative sense. So, but when he says all of which are an extra shell on the covering of pure bhakti, I don't know exactly what he means there. I wouldn't see them as an extra, what did he call it? External shell, extra shell on the coverings, an extra shell on the coverings of pure bhakti. So what are the coverings of pure bhakti that they're an extra shell on top of? I really don't know what he means there, but I don't see them as superficial, and I don't see them as being some type of a problem. I think that for that matter, that the cultural ethos around Gaudiya Vaishnavism is obviously related to its essence, but can itself be seen as a little bit external to its essence at the same time. So those are some of my thoughts. I mean, just basically, obviously, yes, Gaudiya Vaishnavism, as represented by our Bhakti Vinod Paribar, is dealing with new times, new circumstances, different cultures, and so forth. And it's going to look a little bit different than some other expressions of it, but it lends itself to different expressions, as long as those expressions don't deviate in Siddhanta from the actual core teachings. And that's part of the teachings, that while the Siddhanta, the philosophy, is one, non-different, singular, abhed, it lends itself to bhed, or differences in expression. So those differences in expression could be differences in expression within a different cultural setting that adapts to that setting, which is what he's talking about. The differences of expression of the same singular philosophy or Siddhanta could be differences in emphasis on different angas of bhakti, different limbs of bhakti. In the higher sense, they could be differences in terms of sentiment. So you could have, for example, essential Gaudiya Vaishnavism expressing itself in sakhi-bhava. You could have it expressing itself in Madhurya Bhava. So those are differences that beautify the singular um, uh, philosophy. It's a philosophy that lends itself to such varied expressions. And again, be they rasic, be they in terms of abhideya, the practice, details on the practice. There's more than one way to look at the practice and apply oneself and so forth, or going even further towards the exterior, cultural differences and sensibilities and so on and so forth. Those are my thoughts. I hope that helps. If you have any further comments on them, well, I welcome them.
Gurudev, that reminds me of the story when the devotees were trying to enter some moth or something, and then there was some confusion in the language, and the devotee said, well, Hare Krishna. He said, oh, Hare Krishna, come on in. He wouldn't let him in until he said Hare Krishna.
Okay, good. What else? Another question?
Pranada?
Yes, Hare Krishna. Good morning. Referring to a quote from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, and I think this is something that you sent me, so it has a little comment. The priya-narma sakhas are greater than the surit sakhas and priya sakhas because they have a special mood towards Krishna, that is, an absorption of sakhi-bhava, and are engaged in very intimate services like secretly assisting Krishna's sweethearts. And then the quote goes on, but the question is, so the special move they have toward Krishna is an absorption of sakhi-bhava. Now, sakhi-bhava, what I understand that is romantic feelings for Krishna of the sakhis, the gopis, female companions. So I was just assuming that means that their absorption is in wanting to render service to Krishna and the gopis in that Madhura Rasa. But if there's something else that can be said about that, could you describe the sakhi-bhava of the gopas?
Yes. Thank you for the question. Sakhi-bhava is a term that I think is used, I'm not sure, by Rupa Goswami or in Ujjval Nilamani or in the commentary on that by Jiva Goswami, Sakhi-bhav. The bhav is more typically described as priya-narma sakha-bhav, and bhava vishesh, a very special type of bhava within Sakhya-rasa that differentiates it to some extent from both Sakhya-rasa that is bundled together with dasya or vatsalya, or Sakhya-rasa unto itself. And the difference, of course, is that these particular gopas, they are aware and sensitive to the romantic feelings of Krishna. And so they have a desire for Madhurya Rasa in order to be able to participate in Krishna's romantic leelas. Now, that said, and relative to your question, there are different types of Madhurya Rasa. And the two principal types that Rupa Goswami outlines in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu are Madhurya Rasa of the Sambhog variety, where there are gopis who want to have a romantic relationship with Krishna. And then there is the Tadanumodana or Tadbhav, which means they sympathize with, in our lineage, Radha's romantic desires for Krishna and seek to assist her. So among the two, he says the latter is preferable. And so we find some varieties of that where, for example, Lalita and Vishaka, who could be group leaders themselves have their own entourage and pursue as a main focus romantic interaction and union with Krishna. Instead, they subjugate themselves to Radha and assist her. Unlike, for example, Chandravali or others who, in effect, are competitors of Radha for union with Krishna. Now, among those in Radha's group, like Lalita and Vishaka, they may have romantic relationship with Krishna directly at times, in a way that Radha wants them to, for example. They then have priya sakhis or direct assistants under them, who also may, as a secondary part of their bhava, their madhurya bhava, have relationship with Krishna. And then there are the manjaris, who are particularly typically characterized as not having or even desiring and avoiding at all costs a direct romantic relationship with Krishna due to their extreme Radha dasyam, extreme commitment to the service of Radha. So this is the type of Madhurya Rasa that's emphasized, and the window to which has been opened to persons through Gaudiya Vaishnavism. So when it comes to Sakhi Rasa and the priya-narma sakhas and their liking for Madhurya Rasa, this is the type of Madhurya Rasa that they then become influenced by. Tad anumodana. Anumodana means sympathetic or empathetic. So they don't want to have, they're not interested in a direct, obviously, romantic relationship with Krishna. They're interested in the romantic relationship of the gopis with Krishna. And they will have their own group leader amongst the gopas, and they will have a Yuteshwari or a female group leader also amongst the gopis. And through that service to the gopis, they become familiar with the romantic sentiments of Krishna. So you have, like, for Subal, he's a servant of Radha and he's a friend of Krishna. And he participates in the romantic life of Radha and Krishna with great sympathy and empathy for the plight of the divine couple. And he risks his life even that they might be united as per their desires in the middle of the day in broad daylight, which seems impossible, going to such extremes as, sneaking into Yavat and Jatila's home where Radha is living, and in the Subal Milan, Leela exchanging clothes with her. She goes to meet Krishna. He's left in the compound, dressed like Radha, having to mill around Jatila and pretend that he's Radha. He's risking his life, so to speak, for their union. So it's an extreme example, but this is then again the type of Madhurya Rasa that they're influenced by. And Rupa Goswami points out in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu that one situated in a particular rasa may have an affinity for another rasa, which is compatible. Some rasas are not, all rasas are not compatible with one another, and a little bit of common sense bears that out. Rupa Goswami gives a list of compatible and incompatible rasas and says, and there are others, and use your common sense to see why this wouldn't be compatible with another, and so forth. But when one situated in a particular rasa has a desire for appreciation of another rasa that is compatible, that other rasa becomes a subordinate influence on one's own rasa. One's own rasa in this case is called the angi rasa. Angi means the body, and the other rasa that one becomes attracted to then becomes an anga, or a limb of that. Its purpose is to nourish the anga rasa. So the purpose then of the gopas, in terms of their desire for Madhurya rasa, is that that Madhurya rasa will enhance their Sakya rasa, and as such, enable them to be a friend, carry on with their friendly relationship with Krishna at times when he's really taken by his love for the gopis and for Radha in particular, and be capable of assisting him in that, in ways that other gopas don't have that interest and don't have the capacity, to assist him in times of his need and so forth. So they're typically characterized, these sakhas. One of their anubhavs, for example, that is particular to their type of bhav is whispering in the ears, exchanging messages with the gopis and so forth. You're not going to find the other cowherd boys doing that. So they're a particular type of cowherd boy. They're kind of like they're males that have some they're well balanced. They have some female sensibilities to them also, if you will. They're not like just an alpha male, if you will, to talk about it in a limited way from a modern psychological point of view. But interestingly, while any of the rasas, or any one in a particular rasa, may be attracted for some time to another rasa that is favorable or compatible, that is something that's temporary. Therefore, when another rasa becomes an anga of the angi, the sakhi-bhava, the rasa that defines a devotee, typically that occurs for a short period of time. Therefore, it's compared, that angi rasa, that anga rasa, to a sanchari bhav, because sanchari bhavs come and go in terms of their influence. That's what the word sanchari actually means. Let's say transitory. But here they're termed differently because these are actually sentiments, be they primary or secondary rasas, which means that they're not sancharis. Sanchari bhavs typically do not have the capacity to define a person, if you will. So, but they function in this way to some extent like sanchari bhavs. But the unique thing, of course, about the priya-narma sakhas is that this isn't happening temporarily, because they're fine-tuned to their friend Krishna, and of course to Balaram as well, like the other sakhas. And from a tattva point of view, the two are one. They're like twins. But from an emotional point of view, they're a little different, and so they're fine-tuned to Krishna's emotional and romantic sensibilities, and those sensibilities are always there in his heart. Sometimes they come out more than at other times, and sometimes they come out and they actually play themselves out in the context of the Leela. And those Narma sakhas are there then and participating in that. And when in the midst of Leelas where that cannot come out and it's still there, they are so fine-tuned, to it, to Krishna's heart in that regard, that they can pick up when his mind is drifting in that direction. They can read his mind, so to speak, with regard to his romantic sensibilities. And so even in circumstances where Krishna's not able to play out his romantic life in the presence of the gopis. His heart is still beating for Radha, and they're aware of it. So the point I'm making is that we find no instance in which those narma sakhas are not influenced by the anga rasa of Madhurya, of the Tadanumodan type, which means sympathetic, empathetic, supportive feelings for Radha and Krishna's romantic life, supportive feelings that play out into actual acts that, in some instances, bring about the union, mitigating, for example, the man, the jealousy of Radha to bring the two back together, or being, as I said earlier, like in the case of Subal, active in the intrigues that Radha's married life, the obstacles that a married life brings up, and helping Radha and Krishna overcome them, and so forth. So this is their sakhi-bhava, if you will. And at times it'll be more prominent than other times, but it's always there. Therefore, it defines them. They are not priya sakhas who are in purely sakya rasa, that's sometimes influenced by this Madhurya rasa and sometimes not. They're a distinct group. And this is what distinguishes them. Therefore, their bhav is not sankul, which it means a packaging together of sakya with dasya or with vatsalya, making for a younger brother or an older friend. Nor is their bhav just keval, pure sakya rasa unto itself, like Sridham, Sudam, and so forth. It's that and more, that more being the influence of Madhurya rasa, which causes Jiva Goswami and other theologians in Gaudiya Vaishnavism to characterize it as a particular bhav unto itself. So again, while other rasas may be influenced by another compatible rasa for some time, and then not, and so forth, they're always influenced by this. So they're unique in the kingdom of rasa. Does that help?
Yes, and so when you use the term sakhi-bhava, that can refer to the narma sakhas and the manjaris?
Well, sakhi is sakhi means friend.
Oh, yeah, right.
It doesn't even it's not necessarily referring to a feminine friend either.
Okay, that's what I was taking it as, feminine. Okay.
Well, it is being used in that context there. In that context, whether it's Rupa Goswami, I believe, or maybe Jiva Goswami, refers to them as sakhi-bhava. What he's saying is what I've just explained to you. That's what he means by sakhi-bhava, that they're in sakya rasa, but influenced by Madhurya rasa of the empathetic or sympathetic variety, and are thus capable of participating in the romantic affairs. And in that, under that influence, when it's very prominent, then they have no attraction themselves to the gopis. So their male sensibilities tend to be subdued, in that regard, at least, in such instances. Otherwise, they're full-on Krishna's friends, and they may wrestle with Krishna and herd cows with him, and so on and so forth.
Do the narma sakhas tend to be younger? Like Subal is like 12 and a half years old, or they get up to 16 years old?
They're described as more or less the same age as Krishna, maybe a little younger, but they're not like, you have cowherd friends of Krishna that are a little older than Krishna and a little younger. And the older ones are influenced also by Vatsalya rasa, and the younger ones by Dasya rasa. The priya-narma sakhas maybe a year younger or something like that, but they are not like those influenced by Dasarasa because they're mature for their age. So, in the Prakat Leela, in the Manifest Leela, Krishna becomes a Kishore at the age of 7. At the age of 7, he begins the Vastraharana Leela, stealing the gopis' clothes. The following year, in the month of Kartik, that took place in the month after Kartik. Then the following year, he's 8 years old, becomes 8 in August. So come October, Kartik, he's 8 years old. He's in the Rasa Leela. He leaves Vrindavan in his 11th year as a Kishore. He's been a Kishore from 7 to 11, but he is mature like a 16-year-old. So he has the sensibilities of the 16. So they will have the same. They're in the Dharma sakhas. They will go through the same similar development, and they will have. They're, more or less the same age. I think maybe Sabal's a year younger or something like that. So it's not like Krishna's 16, 12. I don't know if you heard that. It's not like Krishna's 16 and they're only 12 or something like that. Does that help?
Yes, thank
Hello?
you. Yes, thank you.
Hello? Okay. And
Thank
all
you,
these
sir.
things I've played out in great detail in my forthcoming book. So
Do we have
it should
any
be very
date for
helpful.
that forthcoming book?
This year.
Hari Hari.
Okay. 2021. Anything else? Is there a third question?
Yeah, Kishore has a question.
Pranams, Gumaraj.
Haribol.
So we've been reading the Bhagavad Gita here, and at the beginning of the 5th chapter, Arjuna asks, which is better, sannyas or karma yoga? And I'm wondering if this question and the following answers can be understood in the context of bhakti, that is, those engaged in preaching or service versus those engaged in nirjan bhajan. And a couple of verses following in connection to that, Krishna says, childish persons, not the learned, declare that contemplative life and selfless action are separate. One who practices either of these correctly achieves the same result. That destination attained by the contemplatives is also attained by the yogis. Contemplative life and karma yoga are one. One who perceives this sees things as they are.
Yeah, you broke up a little bit. I think I understand your question. Your question is that Krishna in the Gita is speaking about nishkam karma and gyan, and he advocates nishkam karma over gyan in terms of avoiding and artificially taking up contemplative life when one is not yet qualified. And so that's a bigger problem, he says. And therefore, better to do nishkam karma, which is to continue to work within the realm of the Vedic karmic duties and sensibilities, but without attachment for the results. And at the heart here is the lack of detachment. So if I'm doing activities which I'm already have momentum for, but I learn to do them without attachment for them, then they're not accruing any reaction, but the momentum that my life has at the moment enables them to play out, and rather than cutting them off and sitting down, because I have a certain momentum, I may be attracted back to them, I may be drawn back to them, and temple is a problem. So it's kind of a nishkam karma is going to be to move in the direction of contemplative life. So your question is, does this apply, if I understand it correctly, in bhakti, in terms of nirjan bhajan or solitary bhajan, which would be contemplative life to an extreme, and let's say the life of mendicant, paribrajak, who's preaching, teaching, and is more active in the world, but without attachment to the world. And the answer to your question, I think, is yes. And this was this of Bhakti Siddhanta. There's a famous poem about him, composed by Pujapad Sridhar Maharaj. A Sanskrit poem. It was very popular. Disciples of Bhakti Siddhanta, extent that it's sung in all of the Gaudiya Math temples every day for the most part, and in some places some of the verses are engraved in stone on the walls in those temples. And in that poem, one of the lines that really kind of captures Bhakti Siddhanta, he says, Paramhamsa Varam Paramartha Bhatim Yatitho Dharane Kvitavesha Yatim Yatirajaganai. He is a Paramhamsa, Bhakti Siddhanta. But he dressed himself as a paribrajak. So this refers to the 4 stages of sannyas. Bahudak, Kudichak, Bahudak, Paribrajak, and Hamsa. So forget the first 2 stages for the moment, but the 3rd stage is Paribrajak, where the sannyasi is no longer staying in the village, and they're the early stages, Kudichak and Bahudak. He'll stay in the village. He'll stay in the village, and relatives will bring food. And so then he'll stay in the village, and they won't bring food, and then he'll leave the village and travel and and be homeless, right? So his detachment has grown, has developed, so that he can do that, and then the last stage is Hamsa, where he sits down, and wherever he sits becomes a holy place. And people come there and they develop detachment just by coming there. While Pujapad Sridhar Maharaj depicts Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur as a Paramhamsa, which he was, he sat down to chant a billion names of the Lord, and then he got inspiration from that to get up and dress himself as a paribrajak and travel and preach and show a way in which persons could be more involved actively with their senses in the world, but not of the world, and as a result, come to a point where they could actually sit and do bhajan like Haridas Thakur. To give an example, once one of my godbrothers who had taken sannyas from Prabhupada, his name was Guru Kripa Maharaj, he asked Prabhupada if he could just sit in Mayapur and chant, and Prabhupada said, yes, try it. So he sat in a grass hut, and he chanted, and he was chanting a couple of lakhs a day, and then once a day, someone would bring food and put it at the door, and then he would, open the door, take his meal, and that's how he was living. But he reported to Prabhupada or he told me that after a couple of weeks, he found his mind starting to think, are they going to bring that same doll again? I wish they could bring a samosa. And this started to get in the way of his concentration, his capacity to focus in Nam Bhajan. And then it, developed further from there, desires and so forth, that he wasn't effectively able to cleanse away by adopting the posture of a nirjan bhajan, solitary bhajan. And so he got up from there, and he told Prabhupada, and Prabhupada said, so go and preach for 10 years, then come back and try again. So I think that answers your question, no?
Yes, it does. Thank you. And would you see this section where Krishna says these two are one? Those that see them as separate are ignorant, or do you see this as support that
Yeah.
the Gaudiyanandis and Bhajanandis are one in essence?
Yeah, I think that Gaudiyanandi means, refers to the kind of the preacher, and Bhajananandi means the solitary person. There's another sense in which those terms could be used in that a perfect devotee could have a penchant more for that preaching than solitary bhajan. But anyway, yeah, they're one. And but we're talking more of one as a means, to the other. And in that sense, they're one in essence. They're still different, because one in Nirjan Bhajan could get up and preach, but one in the Paribhaja kind of mode, as we're explaining, couldn't necessarily sit down and just do Nirjan Bhajan. So we're talking about it like that, but in essence, they're doing the same thing, living without attachment, developing attachment for Krishna. Now, I should also mention that I think that in the vision of Bhaktisiddhanta, this just didn't mean everybody should be a sannyasi and travel and preach and so forth, but he, created monasteries that were active, and they were beehives for serving Krishna and extending the dispensation of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu further. And so some people were pujaris there, some people were managing the temple, some people were gardeners, and so on and so forth. And they were, fully engaged in service in the monastery to the deity in the temple and so forth, rather than just sitting and doing bhajan. And amongst them, some were preachers also, and giving classes and so on and so forth. So all of that, if you will, is kind of like a parallel, within the Bhakti Marg to the idea of do nishkam karma, rather than prematurely taking up the Gyan Marg. And we see this in the life of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu took sannyas, he traveled, he preached, he taught Rup Sanatan, and he converted Prakashananda and Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, Venkata and so on and so forth. And he did this for quite a few years, until, as a result of that, his inner life swelled to such an extent that he could no longer be a public figure. And he enters into his Antya Leela. And so, and Chaitanya Charitamrita, as I've said before, is really focused on the Madhya Leela, which is the way, and where all the teachings come and so forth, the way to enter into this bhava. You don't practice kind of bhava. You do things such that bhava will, you engage in sadhana bhakti with such intensity that bhava will come. And then it is its own teacher. We can learn some things about, obviously we should, about bhava bhakti and so forth. We should have an idea about the ideal, the bhava deha and so forth. But bhava is its own teacher. So I hope that helps. I see another question from Martin here. He says, Haribol Maharaj, chapter 2, verse 56 of your commentary in the Gita, it says, when God desires to take his devotees from the world, no longer able to bear the pain of separation from him, he distributes his devotees' pious prarabdha to those who love him, and any impious prarabdha karma to those who oppose him. Can you share some words about this? This is the vision and the insight of Baladev Vijayabhusana in his Govinda Bhashya's commentary on Vedanta Sutra. So prarabdha karma is karma that is already playing itself out. You have karma that is not yet accrued or not yet manifest, but is waiting to manifest. And in different stages of that also. Just like, let's say you have arrows in your, what do they call it? Quiver or something. And then you have an arrow on the bow, ready to shoot. And then you have an arrow that's already shooting. So the prarabdha karma is the arrow, it's already been shot. How are you going to bring it back? It's already been shot. The ones that are in the bow could be put back into the quiver, or the ones that are in the quiver could be taken off. So there's a way to get rid of this karma that has not yet accrued, that has not matured. And the way to do that is through, well, transcendental knowledge, for example. By gyan, and the culture of that, that's possible. But by gyan, you cannot remove the prarabdha karma. But the specialty and the power of bhakti is that it can remove the prarabdha karma. So you're going to ask, well, how are you going to remove the karma? How are you going to take that arrow that's already been shot and bring it back? To give another example, there may be things that you can do to prevent a cold from manifesting. Once you get a cold, well, there's nothing you can do. You can deal with the symptoms to try to suppress them so it's less miserable, but you just have to wait a few days for it to pass. It's already happened. So now the statement in the scripture is that prarabdha karma can be done away with by bhakti. So how does that happen? So Baldev gives an example. The prarabdha karma is taken and the good karma is given to his relatives or friends or whatnot, and the bad karma is given to his enemies. That's a way of explaining how the prarabdha karma is dispersed, and one is relieved from it by the power of bhakti. And in its place, of course, then the devotee is given shobhana karma. Shobhana means beautiful. It means something arranged by Krishna. And it may take different courses even. Bharat Maharaj, who became a mendicant, gave up his royal position as the emperor of India or of Bharat. In his life in the forest, became attracted to a deer. You know the story, it's in the 5th canto of the Bhagavatam. That is said to be an arrangement of Krishna, shobhana karma, through which Krishna used Bharat, who was in bhava, which means he wouldn't have any karma, material karma. Krishna used him to teach us by his example, not to get attached. It has far-reaching implications. So give a brief answer here to you. I hope that's helpful, but I brief because we're already a little bit over time. So I hope I did justice to the questions. You told me we only had 3. We got 4.
That's good.
So, and it gave me a chance to go into some of them in a little more depth. I hope that it's been helpful to those who asked and those who are listening. Jai.
Thank you.
Vrinda ki jai.
So before everyone goes, there's a few announcements. Let me stop the regular recording. So